Wait. On. Hello. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I'm really happy that we've got a full house here today. My name is Marcus Miller. I'm the director here at the Gordon Snellgrove Gallery. I want to give thanks to our Aboriginal brothers and sisters for being on Treaty 6 territory, also homeland to the Métis people. I'm really happy to have this panel here, and one of the, so the premise for the panel is 35 years of BlackFlash Magazine. Yeah? So it's the anniversary this year, and we have a table at the back that I'm sure all of you have noticed. So we're launching the latest issue of the magazine. We have copies available here. And
this is the latest
they're
issue.
Real cheap.
Yeah,
they're real
$5
cheap.
issues, $10 subscriptions today.
So I think we're going to hear a little bit about the history of BlackFlash and in general artist-run centers here in Saskatoon, because BlackFlash comes out of the Photographer's Gallery, which amalgamated with Video Verite back in the day to become Paved Arts. And we have people who can speak to the past and the future. And I hope some of the discussion is going to pertain to where we are today with not only BlackFlash, but with artist-run centers. You know, when artist-run centers started in Canada in the late 60s, early 70s, that was kind of the first generation here. There was a clear raison d'etre. And the raison d'etre had something to do with new art forms, women, people of color not being represented at the major institutions. And so that was a very clear purpose for artist-run centers. And it was an emancipatory movement, yeah? It was about artistic self-determination.
Yes!
Right? Right? Do I have that right?
Damn right!
Yeah. And I think that's something that we have to keep hanging on to. However, by the time it came to like the 80s, the museums, the major galleries started showing the same kinds of work that artist-run centers were showing, and so that's, from one point of view, that's a great mark of their success. Yeah. But from another point of view, it spun artist-run centers into a kind of an identity crisis. What now? What should we do now? And so that's been a kind of a lingering question, I personally would say, ever since, right? So I'm hoping that you're all going to disagree with this and argue against me. And I'm not going to say anything more about it, but just to sort of set up the discussion like that. And I'm going to introduce Leah Taylor here, who's going to be our moderator. Leah?
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Marcus. And we didn't realize we were going to need a microphone, so I guess we'll just keep passing this along as we go. It's really, really great to have everybody here today, so thank you for coming, and also to have our 4 panelists, 2 of which have traveled to be with us. And as Marcus likely mentioned, Brenda Frances Pelkey, who I'm going to introduce first, it also has a retrospective that's being installed right now in the College Art Galleries. So the opening is on Friday at 7:30, and I encourage you to come and see the exhibition. It'll be up until April 15th. So thank you, Brenda, also for coming with your exhibition. So I'm just going to go through biographies of each of our panelists so you have a sense of who they are and where they come from. And then from there, I'm going to open up with questions to our panelists, and they can take their time to respond. It's sort of loosely guiding it, and if people have some questions, you can jump in, but we'll open the floor at the end as well. So again, thank you, everyone. Turn off your cell phone. Brenda Frances Pelkey currently lives and works in Windsor, Ontario, where she is professor in the School of Creative Arts at the University of Windsor. After graduating from Sir Sandford Fleming College, Brenda moved across the country from Nova Scotia to British Columbia, photographing the communities in which she lived. She moved to Saskatchewan in 1980 and became involved with the photo community through venues such as BlackFlash and the Photographer's Gallery. In 1994, she completed her MFA at the University of Saskatchewan, where she worked as an associate professor in the Department of Art and Art History. Brenda has exhibited throughout Canada, as well as Scotland, France, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Finland, and England. Her works appear in numerous collections, such as the Mackenzie Art Gallery, the Ramey Modern, the Art Bank, the U of S collection, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Dunlop Art Gallery, Confederation Centre for the Arts, and the National Gallery of Canada. Brenda has had a number of solo exhibitions, including As If There Were Grace from 2000, Haunts 2001, Spaces of Transformation 2004, Threshold 2005, and that's just to name a few. And as I mentioned, currently her retrospective is touring across Canada with the Art Gallery of Windsor, and again it opens this Friday.
That's wonderful. I snuck in.
And Sandra, thank you for being here as well. Sandra traveled here from Vancouver just for this panel conversation.
Get out of teaching today.
So we really appreciate the effort. Sandra Semchuk is a storyteller, photographer, and video artist from Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. She was co-founder of the Photographers Gallery in Saskatoon. Her work consists of familial autobiography and dialogues across generations, cultures, and species. She worked collaboratively for 15 years with her late husband, James Nicholas, Rock Creek actor and orator. Such work considers the potential conciliations within self and between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Their dialogue, was grounded in experience in the primary knowledge of place, land, flora, fauna, weather, and human stories. Sandra's book on the internment of Ukrainians in Canada, titled The Stories Were Not Told, Canada's World War I Internment Camps, will be published by the University of Alberta Press. Sandra has exhibited her work and collaborations at, to name a few, Presentation House Gallery, the Belkin, Comox Art Galleries, the Photographers Gallery, the Mendel Art Gallery, Mackenzie Gallery, Center for Creative Photography in Arizona, Museum of Modern Art in New York, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Spain, Urban Shaman, the Canadian Museum of Contemporary Photography in Ottawa. And Sandra currently teaches at Emily Carr University Art and Design. So to the left of me is Travis Cole. Travis is currently the executive director at Paved Arts. Travis was the managing editor of BlackFlash Magazine from 2013 to 17. Is that correct? Thank you. He is co-curator of Saskatoon's annual Sounds Like Audio Festival and co-founder of Unheard Sound Collective. Prior to moving to Saskatoon, Travis lived in Winnipeg, where he co-founded Open City Cinema and helped launch the annual Winnipeg Underground Film Festival. He also previously worked at Windex Festival of Moving Image, Border Crossings Magazine, and Video Pool Media Arts Center. Travis graduated from Concordia University in 2003 with degrees in photography and film studies. Thanks for being here, Travis. And David, you want to just wave a hand, David? David Lariviere has been artistic director of Paved Arts since 2008, where he is responsible for developing and implementing the vision and direction of the organization's artistic programming and residencies. Can everyone hear me?
Perfect.
Thank you. Over his tenure, David has curated 6 full exhibitions for Paved Arts and contributed critical texts for other centers such as AKA Artist Run, Art Space, Latitude 53, Modern Fuel, Niagara Artist Company, Skoll, and BlackFlash. In addition to his work as artistic director, David maintains a professional artistic practice with recent exhibitions in Calgary, Seattle, Regina, and a major residency and solo exhibition project planned for Open Space in Victoria in the summer of 2018. So coming up soon. Sorry, lost my spot here. David holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Alberta and an MA in Fine Arts degree from Goldsmiths College, University of London. So please help me welcome our panelists. So we're just going to jump right in, and I think if we just want to ask a question, if you don't have an answer, that's totally fine. Some of the questions are directed specifically at people, but maybe we'll just sort of go this way and we can work our way back the other way if it's more comfortable. But we'll start going this way. Can you tell us about your involvement with BlackFlash Magazine?
Okay. Well, I guess the majority of that was actually mentioned in the bio. So I was the managing editor of BlackFlash for the last 4 years. I just recently left the position to take on the executive director position at Paved. My, I guess, relationship with BlackFlash goes much further back. Probably the early 90s was when I was first introduced to the magazine. In the new issue, in my intro, there's a lot of information in regards to that, so you can read about that there. I'll pass it on to you.
Well, as Leah mentioned, I am the artistic director of Paved Arts, and part of that, beginning 10 years ago, and part of that was actually dealing with the permanent collection that was part of the photographer's gallery, so I oversaw some of that kind of transition, and that was a very interesting exposure to the history of this community. Other than that, I've had the pleasure and honor of writing a few articles, three different articles for BlackFlash over the years, and really we'll get into it more, but really appreciate it as a cultural venue in this city.
I've never been really directly involved with the BlackFlash other than being on the board of TPG and okaying the funding line for BlackFlash, which I don't know, I was going to ask Sandra this question. When you founded the Photographer's Gallery, was there a publication involved?
It didn't come immediately, but Exchange was one of the first publications that we had, and then we had a journal for the Photographer's Gallery.
Yeah.
And then it became.
Yeah, I remember when it became BlackFlash, and that was when Dan Thorburn, I think, was the director of the gallery, and he's responsible for the name.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Do you know the background to the name?
Well, what I recall in the midst of memory is a lot of discussion about naming the magazine.
Okay.
So there was a lot of discussion, and BlackFlash won of all of the names. And it seemed to me that it actually related to some obscure thing in photography.
Okay.
And I tried to Google it at lunch today.
Yeah,
and
we've all
found
done
out.
that work.
Yes, exactly. There is a cartoon character called BlackFlash.
Yes.
Yes, and
Yeah.
you can't get any further than that.
Yeah. That's one of the first things that comes up.
Yeah. The first thing that comes up, and then nothing else came up for me after that. So, but I remember him being quite insistent that was the name, and everyone said, well, okay, it's a bit weird, but we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the tagline mandate was at that time? Because now it's...
Oh, it's lens-based, time-based.
Yeah, lens-based, time-based. Was there?
I think it was contemporary photography.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Who are you? I don't know, I'm probably just upstairs. Photographers here, Martha. Thelma Pepper is here. We're honored to have Thelma Pepper here. I'm Sandra Semchuk, and as one of the founders of the Photographers Gallery, when we started to do publications, I found it really helpful in terms of having some feedback on work that was being done by ourselves as photographers here, but also to have to read about photographers across the country, because that started to happen quite quickly. There was a generosity in the Photographers Gallery that came out of that whole movement to create an artist-run space and that self-determination that you're talking about. So personally, I've written a couple of pieces for BlackFlash, and I've had a few issues that would have talked about my work, And I've been privileged to read about your work in it and Thelma's work in it and other people that I know, because a part of what keeps us going as artists is our peers. You know, and that opportunity to have some kind of exchange, some kind of dialogue. And it's really, really special when you've got writers taking that time to really look at your work and to think about it, isn't it? We need to do that for each other. So, and that's what this magazine has done.
Oh yeah, I think it's done it really well.
Maybe I could make one comment there. Just seizing on a little bit on Marcus's introduction as well, because I think that as much as the Public Gallery has come to absorb the mandate that you've outlined, there's still the modus operandi that's very distinct to artist-run culture, which is to say that it is artist-run, and it is about artists supporting artists. And in that sense, BlackFlash is an artist-run entity in the same way that Pig Arts or AKA Artist-Run are.
Just for the microphone. We might have needed a few more microphones. I guess this is.
It's the talking stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems to be that way. So this sort of carries on from what we were just discussing, but BlackFlash is the oldest photo art magazine in Canada that's still in print. And again, I think we've mentioned it several times now, but this is the 35th year anniversary. So I just want to pose out to you guys, why do you think this happened here in Saskatoon? And why do you think it's lasted 35 years? What's with the longevity of it? So I don't expect a concrete answer, but if we can maybe think through that a little bit together. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I was discussing this a little bit earlier with Sandra, and I was asking you yesterday what your thoughts on that were in regards to how photography was so much more prevalent back then as it is now. It's much harder to find the younger generation self-identifying as photographers. I think in a way, like in the 21st century, I feel like people are much more multimedia artists, and so I don't think that they necessarily identify in one particular medium. But I found it really interesting because like Saskatoon at one point was identified as kind of a hotspot for photography, and I'm sure that a lot of that had to do with the Photographers Gallery and BlackFlash. I'll probably let you speak on this a bit more, but that's probably what I thought was really interesting at that point.
Would you care to respond?
Oh, sure. Can I read from BlackFlash a little bit? Thank you for that permission. One of the things that I observed about the photographers and in the Photographers Gallery from the beginning was that we were tracing as we made culture, so that the photographic work that we did was an articulation of the culture that we were building. So there's a base that was about making culture. So let me just read a little bit, and if you don't mind, I just would like to just come in sporadically throughout this panel with a little bit of the reading from this piece, just as a little bit of a disruption, as we do as artists. Break things up. My father walks slowly across the expanse of land behind the house. He turns the water on, begins the long, slow ritual of watering the wild trees that he's brought from different landscapes to plant, each section of trees in honor of one of his 3 children. He wants us to see them grow. At the first tree, he soaks the ground thoroughly, then lets the water build over time to form a deep pool of water under the tree in order to saturate the roots. He takes the shovel and etches a trough from the pool under the tree through the dry soil to the next tree. The water spills into the trough, moving slowly past stone obstructions to the next tree, where there's another pool of water, and so he continues until all the trees have been watered. I am there with my camera, lying on the ground, tracing the water's movement. In 1970, I was 22 years old. Finished my Bachelor of Fine Arts. I studied with Hans Domage, who has just passed. And soon to marry photographer Richard Holden. I didn't know that when Richard and I entered into fervent dialogues about photography with James Lazitza, Sylvia Janescu, Hans Domage, John and Joe Nansen, Ruth Garson, Bob Wells, Kent Martins, and others, that a shape would emerge from that dialogue that would create culture for more than 35 years, the Photographer's Gallery, 25 years, the Photographer's Gallery. I didn't know how many people would pour their lives into making a vital cultural center of value to a community that would extend internationally. In the beginning, we called ourselves the Group Photographers. As a group, our needs were immediate. We felt locked out of conventional exhibition spaces. Our first exhibition was in the windows of the old Eaton's building, and chose in a self-determined way to create a facility to exhibit our work and that of other photographers. As there were no parallel galleries at the time, our model evolved from the cooperative models in their various forms throughout the province. You mentioned barn raising. The strong rural community base, the direct ties to the land, and the utopian model of democratic socialism, the one that had inspired Medicare nationwide, provided us with the confidence to consider ourselves capable of producing a center outside major Canadian cities, in the middle of a landscape that was vast and spacious, space and light. Sylvia Janescu Lazitza would say, that's what made photographers of us.
Does anybody have any responses to that, or shall I move to the next question?
I have a response maybe to, not to the text directly, but to this notion of the longevity of BlackFlash. I think obviously a big piece of that has to be its capacity for change as well. That it has changed over the years. The other thing is too, and I feel a little bit like an interloper here because it really, or self-conscious that maybe John Schelling should be up here and not me. But I will say that it's benefited from the grit and determination of Travis and John and others. Who've kept it alive as well, which can't be really understated because it has been at various points. You could speak to this better, but
I don't know if I should.
Well, I don't mean to be a downer, but it's also something to be celebrated.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Well, when I came into BlackFlash, there was already many allusions to the dark times of the late 90s, the late 2000s, etc., etc. BlackFlash did go through some pretty lean periods, and there's some major disruptions over the years. John absolutely can speak on this, and I think that I probably can testify that it was a lot to do with his hard work that carried it through. Fortunately or unfortunately, because then I was stuck holding the bag. But it's a fantastic magazine. I was very proud of being part of it, and was a very formative magazine for me when I was a teenager. So the fact that it's still around and the fact that it's still evolving is incredible, and it's something that I think that Saskatchewan should be really proud of. As it was mentioned, it is the oldest photography magazine in Canada, and And I feel like a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is a constantly evolving work. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add something. When I think of BlackFlash and the Photographers Gallery, I think of the very strong core, the group of members and volunteers who devoted a lot of time both to the Photographers Gallery and as a kind of offshoot of BlackFlash. And I know some of those hard times because they happened when I was still there. Issues over editorial things and issues over funding and money.
Oh, yeah.
And what to do and where to take it and who could take it on. And I think it's almost like the spirit that there is here, that it was able to survive. And of course sufficient funding from funding bodies.
Absolutely.
So this question is directed more to Brenda. In the 1990 issue of BlackFlash, there's 2 articles about your work. One was written by Josie Mills and the other by Keith Bell. This is the same issue actually that featured Thelma Pepper's work as well. And the article by Keith Bell focused on the Foundry series. Currently, you're showing this body of work as part of your touring retrospective that's in the College Art Galleries. And also, the same series is now featured in BlackFlash's current 35-year anniversary issue. So it appears to almost have come full circle. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about what that means to you.
Without crying. Yeah, it's, when I did that body of work, the Foundry, I always thought of it as my kiss goodbye to documentary photography in a very straight way. So in a way, lots of things have come full circle because now I find myself photographing very much in a straight documentary fashion again. So yeah, it's interesting the way those things kind of circle back and where you find meaning and stuff. But yeah, it's a little overwhelming when you have a retrospective and you have to look at your own past history closely. And there it is, because of course it's attached to your life, and it keeps coming up. So, yeah, it's very meaningful, and sometimes a little overwhelming to see it all again, because you just go back and re-see what you were doing, and in some sense re-experience the experience of actually doing it. So, yeah, it's very interesting. Sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time kind of actually look at it, but I'm getting used to that.
It's the powerful effect of imagination on the world.
Great effect.
The great. Well, it's such a big idea. How many of you know the body of work that Brenda's done called The Great Effect of the Imagination on the World? Yeah, really, hey? What an extraordinary body of work. And, I read about it in BlackFlash.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And most recently in the last issue that talks about it again, and there's a woman that compares it, one of your images, it's a later piece of work, to Murat Saad.
Yes, yeah.
It's quite wonderful to read that. But this body of work that she's talking about, and how it was written about in BlackFlash was very, very useful to me. And I can always go back and think about it because we imagine ourselves into the world. And there's nobody I know of who made such a clear statement about that than Brenda Pelkey. And that work continues to resonate with me and to inform how we understand our perception. That perception is so much imagination and selection, right? Like what we're choosing to see at any given moment and what we're projecting. And but it's also, for me, it was also about adaptation. that people, and the people that you were referring to were non-Indigenous people. They were immigrant peoples who had left their land and had come to Canada and who did things in their backyards, And those things that they did in their backyards were to create a world that in some kind of way was an articulation of belonging. When they felt some kind of fragmentation or lack of belonging, and so profound. I just wanted to say that. And having that opportunity to participate in that dialogue through BlackFlash was really wonderful.
And I should mention that the 35-year anniversary issue article was written by Marcus Miller on Brenda Pelkey's work. Marcus, is there anything that you wanted to add to this?
Not at all. I'm very
Okay.
happy.
You can read about it in the magazine.
So this is just a question that I hope everyone could respond to. In the spirit of looking back and looking forward with the 35 years, where do you think BlackFlash is going? And do you think it's still important to have a magazine with a mandate that focuses on contemporary photography, contemporary art photography? And again, it doesn't have to be a concrete answer, but I think that there's a lot of potential for where BlackFlash could be going, but also, why do we keep this going?
It's a good question. I don't know, I thought about that a lot when I was working for BlackFlash, and it was obviously something that I think had to do with the interests of the managing editor at the time. I'm sure that the things that I brought into the magazine might not have been brought into the magazine 10 years earlier, and what the person brought into the magazine 10 years prior to that probably would have asked me what the hell I'm doing. But I feel like a lot of it had to do with, not only the managing editor's interests and then what they're carrying forward, but then as well sort of where we are in contemporary photography now. And that's changed so much in the last 10, 15 years, especially with the inundation of digital photography, that type of thing. The way that we look at photography, the way that we interpret it. And I was speaking with Sandra about this earlier, and just how the object of a photograph in a way now is what's being looked at, as opposed to the image itself. I mentioned earlier the idea of multimedia work sort of taking prevalence over visual arts at this point, and looking at a lot of contemporary photographers at this point, they're introducing elements of sculpture, painting, printmaking. They're not necessarily identified as photographers as much as visual artists, and I think with the magazine, it has to be flexible to sort of accept and access that work as well going forward. So the question being, where would it be going? I believe it's because of the fact that the magazine has been so adaptable, I think it will go where it needs to go. Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to say that your point of or your contextualization of the magazine in this contemporary era of ubiquity of images circulating on phones, and I think it makes it all the more urgent in a certain sense as a note of resistance.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of there being a discourse attached to and the kind of reception of lens-based practices.
Totally.
Well, I actually think that it has a very interesting niche to stay with lens-based work in some fashion or another, or wherever that takes it. I also think that one of the reasons for the longevity of the magazine is because it is a niche that you've created, and that it is long-standing magazine that has had, hasn't branched out entirely into the whole realm of contemporary practice, but
I completely agree with you.
yeah, there. And so I think continuing, like you said, to grow as necessary, but to keep that aspect would be very important.
For sure.
Yeah.
Did anybody see my hair stand up? There's this ongoing fight in Canada. And do you remember when we fought for the Canadian Museum of Contemporary Photography? We fought hard, hey? And we got it. And then we lost it, hey? This has a kind of resonance with that fight too, because that is happening in the universities too, in terms of teaching photography. So there's a range of ways in which photography is being used, and that's important that we acknowledge, I think, the whole range in terms of lens-based practices. But we don't erase Ed Bertinsky's work as a photographer, or Thelma Pepper's work as a photographer, because at this moment, we're interested in the way that painting and photography come together, or sculpture and painting and photography come together. There's a way in which I think, in the history of photography, as we've noted as Canadian photographers, and we haven't had that history written, and it needs to be written. I don't think we'd be in this position had that history been written. That there's a literary intelligence and kind of inquiry that is based upon the indexical image, whether it is in film or whether it is in photography. That is a subtle kind of inquiry, and that is a good place. The BlackFlash is a good place for that conversation to be had. And then the wonderful thing about BlackFlash is that it's brought together literary writing, poetic writing, lyrical writing, along with critical writing, and we have diverse ways of experiencing how work can be discussed, which I think is very interesting. So from my point of view, just please be aware of this terrible fight that we've had in Canada, because it hurts like hell.
Mm-hmm.
This leads maybe a little bit from what you were just talking about, Sandra, but thinking now that there's this incredible archive of critical arts writing, and what do you think the role for BlackFlash has been with artists and writers who have had a platform to publish? But also, what will the role of this archive be, say, if BlackFlash were to stop today, 35 years from now, what is this archive going to be? What is the role of it going to be? But also thinking about the platform for publishing and what that means. You can pass it over if you need to.
I'm going to pass it over. I'm going to pass it to David, because I think you have probably a good answer for this.
Well, I don't know if it's a good answer. I think about there's a fair degree of people here who are students, BFA, MFA, and then graduates. And this BlackFlash is a venue, and it's a real opportunity for individuals to participate in shaping a discourse around cultural production. And what's great about it too, and
that's isn't that key?
Yeah.
And one of the great practical, this is maybe a smaller point, but one of the great practical things about having made such a contribution is you can put a hot link right on your CV to that article, and it will take somebody reading your CV to your article online, and they will be able to read it. So there is also all of these capacities for dissemination that are really, that go even beyond the circulation of the magazine.
Anybody else?
Well, I spent yesterday going through the archive, and gosh, it's very impressive, you know, the kind of range of artists who are represented in there, and the thoughts that are represented in there, and it's very rich. There's a lot of depth to some of the writing, and the imagery. It's really intriguing. Even when you're trying to represent moving images, we still have a sense of the kind of content that's trying to be delivered. So I've kept all my issues of BlackFlash from the beginning because I feel they're important. And I haven't kept other magazines. You know, so how will it be? You know, we have it in our archive. We have it at MLCAR, all the issues. The students use it. It's an excellent resource. We do not have histories of either photography or histories of film and video. We've got a few books have been done on film video. Some cultural information on photography, but we have no specific histories. So this will be vital information for when that does occur.
That means that this part of the world is represented.
You know, that's exactly it, right? It's not only that it's an archive of Canadian photography, but it's an archive of Canadian photography from a prairie perspective, which I think is also really invaluable. That, you know, like BlackFlash does, like, obviously focus on a much broader range than just prairie photographers at this point, but there's always some sort of push-pull going on with, like, prairie writers writing on national or international photographers, or national writers writing on prairie photographers, which I always find very interesting. We've been really lucky. Leah's also on the board, by the way, and editorial. But we've been really lucky with, like, kind of picking those collaborations over the last, like, 4 years, eh?
Yeah.
And it's always been really eye-opening to me to find exactly the right writer to speak on a prairie photographer's work, or vice versa. Like, there's so many examples of writers that are coming out of Toronto that are writing on or Vancouver, or wherever the case, like writing on somebody from Winnipeg, and their perspective is just as interesting as the opposite.
I was wondering, Travis, too, if you could maybe talk about the recent digitizing of the archive,
Sure.
just to let people know that it's out there and available.
Yeah, well,
It's sort of out there. We do have the entire 35 history archived at this point, scanned. Nothing too robust. It's just PDFs of the magazine. And what we hope to do in the next couple of years, or and I'm still saying we, BlackFlash hopes to have it up online and available to everyone at some point. And I feel like what you're mentioning in regards to research and dissemination, that's going to be invaluable. Yeah, but it's not quite up yet.
Thanks. So BlackFlash's office in the past 2 years has moved back into the same building with Paved Arts and AK on 20th Street in Riversdale, for those of you who have not been there yet. And it's a kind of a returning home. So I'm wondering, do you think it's important that the artist-run organizations are now working alongside each other as they once had upon conception with the Photographer's Gallery? And just thinking about the idea of it having that physical space, if that's important. So I'll just pass this along and let you share that.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely important. It's always been a natural partnership. The like BlackFlash was spawned out of the Photographers Gallery. Paved was spawned out of the Photographers Gallery. The two organizations have had extensive history together, and even to this day work incredibly well together. And there is a symbiosis going on there with the two organizations, and just being physically within the space, it gives us a lot more opportunity to be responsive to work, and I can go down to David's office and he can throw out 5 names of writers, for instance, or like we can collaborate on a number of things. Paved and AKA own the building, and we're now tenants, and prior to that we were in the Besbro, on the 7th floor of the Besbro, and that was a very different it was a very different time. I felt there was an isolation there away from the artist-run centers, and we're the little guys, we got to stick together, and we got to support each other, and grow together, and it's just it is a coming home to a certain degree, because Paved and BlackFlash are sort of sister organizations.
With very, very close mandates as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
And since BlackFlash has been in the building, although, there's always been a close relationship there, even when BlackFlash was at the Besborough, but certainly there's a lot of potential, and some of it has, I think, come to pass, this kind of capacities for cross-pollination.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, Paved Arts has returned to formalizing a publication series itself in terms of the Pavement anthologies that some of you in this audience have contributed to, and that's in no small part due to inspiration of BlackFlash carrying on such a strong discourse through all these years.
Right.
And I don't know that I have anything more to add than that, except that I know that when BlackFlash was in the same space as the Photographers Gallery, there was always a lot of discussion amongst everyone there, so there was a lot of energy. I hadn't realized that they had separated and gone off to a separate building, and
Yeah.
I can imagine that the energy that's created just being back would be really, really positive.
Well, I came in when it was in the Besbro, and just moving into the AK and Paved building. It's all right. I can project.
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'll just finish my thought. It was night and day. We were with some other literary organizations and that type of thing in the Besbro, but coming into AK and Paved, and immediately the collaborations were happening. So it was very fortunate, and it gave me some new energy as well, because it was quite isolating, just sort of being in the Besbro, running an office by yourself. Yeah,
The top floor.
yeah, near the haunted floor.
So it began with collaborations
Yeah, absolutely.
and cooperative thinking. I just wanted to continue reading.
Sure.
Joan Borsa, who's here, writing about Thelma Pepper's photographs made along Highway 41, writes, "This is a complicated sight. We see the erosion of specific towns and family farms, but we too are caught within forces that barely allow us time to get our own situations under control. But then this is the challenge that Thelma Pepper offers us. An exploration of belonging that questions our allegiance to systems that possibly erode more than what they produce. A recognition that always shifting to the new, to producing more, to equating value with monetary gain is far removed from the maintenance and the care that goes into making the world over and over again." And then I continue. "As the relationship between loss and the photograph became consciously a part of my own work, I realized how useful the apocalyptic in the imagination was in realizing what one values. Brenda Pelkey, in her work, The Great Effect of the Imagination on the World, described the neighbors who constructed worlds in their backyards as people who were trying to create coherent worlds for themselves. Historically closed approaches to the construction of worldviews, particularly extreme applications such as fascism, colonialism, and global imperialism, have all ended up in violence. Were the creators of these fantastic backyard worlds eluding the stereotyping of identity by synthesizing particular hybridized pasts, often from more than one country, in order to make themselves feel more at home? Is it similarly possible that photography could be used to learn how to keep constructions of self and community open and adaptable? Brenda said something else. She said that because her family moved around so much, to her the coherent world often seemed like the foreign world, and the broken and fragmented world seemed more familiar. More comfortable. For those of us who are the offspring of immigrant ancestors who broke from difficult pasts, or offsprings from First Nations ancestors who were dislocated and ghettoized with the building of Canada by our immigrant ancestors, what of those specific pasts do we play out to externalize and make visible? Have we, for example, created a new diaspora within Canada as we moved across the country? James Lazitza made photographs of the grain elevators both inside and out, and documented his relationships to family and friends. His images bear witness to the movement across the country, to the breakdown of the family farm, and to the extended family. Living in Vancouver now, he calls himself an exile from Saskatchewan, and even though he walks through the wilderness of mountain cedar and fern, it is the slough bush and fields of porcupine plains where he grew up that shape much of his experience of where he is. Just one more paragraph. Within each of us is the landscape of our childhood. The articulation of our landscape is formal, gestural, a way of arranging furniture, touching a lover's body, a rhythm in walking, a way of laying the table for supper or laying our bodies down to sleep or die. We glimpse our own landscapes in the contours around us, yet we can never own those landscapes. The landscapes own us.
That's my response to place.
It's fantastic.
Sandra, I really appreciate, respect, and admire the reading that you just gave us, and in particular, I think you captured a kind of complexity around politics of representation in terms of like this sort of open approach and that is hybridized, that I think speaks to the kind of maybe the potential of, again, to return to BlackFlash, the potential of this venue to engage in that kind of level of complexity and nuance.
Did you do that?
May I ask what issue that was, Sandra?
15-2.
Okay.
That's like 1997.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and it's so poignant still.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So this is looking back at a previous issue as well from 2012, issue 29.3. BlackFlash named their issues in these confusing point systems, but when we talk about the year, it makes sense. So in 2012, both Sandra and David on the panel appeared as writers in the issue. David wrote Dice That Are Thrown and the Dice That Fall Back, Dustin Wilson, by David Lariviere, and Giving Context by Sandra Semchuk. Can you each reflect on why these article contributions were important projects for you? If you can pull back to 2012, pardon me.
Shall I go first?
Well, to begin with, Dustin Wilson was an artist who was showing at AKA Artist Run. And it's kind of coincidental to be commenting on this now because the next exhibition at Paved Arts is a solo exhibition that I've curated of Dustin Wilson's work. But ironically, I hope he doesn't mind me divulging this, because I'm probably breaking a few rules, but it strengthens the anecdote. He actually was declined for an exhibition at Paved Arts around the time that he got the exhibition at AKA Artist Run. And the thing about that is, adjudication processes, like for any of you who get downtrodden about being declined, you really shouldn't too much because there's so much chance involved, and it's a very thoughtful process, of course, but there's so many variables that go into it, and all I can say is that because AKA brought him in, and because BlackFlash was a venue that allowed me to step outside of my own frame as the artistic director of Paved Arts, I was enabled to engage in an artist whose work I fell in love with. And it's really desire. It's that kind of like very basic level of strange attraction that propelled that article and two others and a dialogue ever since. So it was very important for me and a big part of my thinking to this day.
That's so interesting. Yeah, who is this one? Do you want to say something?
No, I'm just loving what David was saying. It's so great to hear that, Paved rejects him, and then David ends up falling in love with them, and it's because, we're terrific.
Not so straightforward.
No.
Okay, so that piece is a piece that was written by Andrea Kennard, who is a curator at the National Gallery. And she was doing a series, I believe, of writings on individual photographers that were like 2 or 3 pages. They were short pieces. And it's a wonderful thing to have someone of that kind of insight write about your work. She's one of the people in Canada that knows my work the best. Because they began, it was called the National Film Board Stills Division to begin with. And then became the Canadian Museum of Contemporary Photography, and then now they're housed in the National Gallery. And for those of us from Saskatchewan or from the West Coast to be included in that national dialogue, I think is really important. The particular piece that she was talking about was a piece called Baba's Garden. And I don't know how many of you are close to your grandmothers, but I really believe that one grandmother can change generations because of the capacity for unconditional love. And I adored my Baba. So it's a piece that shows it's a gestural piece where I'm using my camera with my body in relationship to a woman from Halford, Saskatchewan, because my Baba's dead by this point, called Mrs. Kowalski. And in her garden, I don't know how many of you know Ukrainian gardens, Ukrainian-Canadian gardens? Yeah. Well, you know what's in them. You know the kind of plants that are in them. And so it's about that. But she also goes on to talk about other bodies of work, and she also speaks about the most, the recent work on the internment camps. So it's nice to have that kind of little summary, a little career summary, along with an earlier work, and it's an honor. It's an honor. It was an honor to have that. Thank you. It was in the collection of Photographers Gallery.
So we're kind of getting close to the end, and I'm going to open the floor soon for questions. So if you want to start thinking now about what you might want to ask our panel. This one's somewhat geared towards Travis, but I hope everyone might be able to respond as well. And so really it's about your experience as managing editor in the position you held for 4 years. You've worked with basically hundreds of artists and writers and curators to produce the magazine. Do you feel BlackFlash plays an important role in contemporary art in Canada? And why? And actually what Sandra had just said is an interesting lead-in, because she was talking about a curator from the National Gallery writing about her work and just that sort of national dialogue. But I'll hand it over.
I guess speaking on, what was the last thing? We play an important role.
In contemporary art in Canada, not
I think, honestly, I believe that our biggest role, and I think the most important thing, at least for me, is the development and the ongoing conversation with emerging writers and curators. It's something that was really important to me when I came into the position, and I know that there's not many platforms for emerging writers to write, and in a lot of cases, like work very hard to get to that place. And it's one of those things that having their name in a nationally recognized magazine is kind of career changing for a lot of people. And it's always, I find it always really nice to see something online where when they have their little spiel of where they've been published and BlackFlash is in there, it kind of gives me a thrill to be part of that. With photographers, it's I would like to think that we're important in some capacity to their career, but it's again one of those things that it has a lot to do with the way that they're contextualized and how they're written about in the magazine. So I give props to the writers in a lot of cases. Yeah, I don't know if you want to continue on that.
Would somebody else like to speak first? Go ahead. If you'd like that.
Very so polite.
Well, I was
That was directed to someone else.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I just listened.
If you like, I can.
Well, I actually do feel that BlackFlash plays an important role in contemporary art in Canada, and I know that having been written about in BlackFlash has certainly been helpful to my own career as an artist, and I think it does that for the artists that you review and the writers that are used. And you know, it is always it's an honor to be published in publication, and I think you guys did a great job.
Great, thank you.
One of the most important conversations I'm seeing coming out of BlackFlash is a conversation between First Nations artists and non-Indigenous artists, and it's been showing it's been there in the work that's been shown in paved art as well. And of course, a lot of that work comes through Tribe, which have been associated with the Photographers Gallery, and the important work that Laurie Blondeau and others have done. But one of the pieces that's one of my favorite pieces, and I really recommend to my students, is the piece, for example, in Merrill McMaster, and whose work is, performance-based, sculpture-based, but deals very much with the complexities of hybridized identity. And it's an important piece by Ellen Walker that's in this magazine, and it's a part of a really significant international conversation.
I guess maybe just to add one small remark would be that the BlackFlash occupies a very interesting register as well in terms of the potential for experimentation, in the sense that it's the kind of register that I think, again, this applies to maybe artist-run culture in general. You're afforded it in some respects by being, a little bit downtrodden in a sense, not having to answer to this kind of large monetary forces. It actually, flying under the radar has some virtue. I wish that it didn't have to be so far under, and that funding agencies would understand the value on a principle and on the level of actually supporting experimentation. But we live in a kind of mixed up situation on those lines.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful comment.
Yeah, it is a great comment.
Love it.
And it's absolutely true. I completely agree that there's really something to be said about being in a position where nobody's really paying that much attention, so you can adapt as need be. It's been really positive for me. There's not some sort of massive board of directors breathing down my neck. I come up with something and you guys are like, great, and it's like, and it's nice because it gives us opportunity to like kind of duck and weave a little bit more than something that's the size of Canadian art, obviously. So I've been very fortunate to not feel pigeonholed, Yeah.
I guess I have a comment for it too, and I think as part of the editorial committee, I think there's a really organic process that often takes place in developing the content of the magazine, and I think because of the looser structure that we've mentioned, it really allows some of the collaborations to come through without feeling like we have to follow a trend or to really sort of compete, because we're maybe a little on a slightly lesser level in some ways can enrich the content as well. And I think that the majority of the time we like to think we were there first too, often, taking a few more risks.
Yeah.
And as I look around the room,
Statement.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's totally been true for my time at the magazine. And the issue, the 35th year anniversary issue really speaks to that when you look at the covers. Just the artists that have been featured on the cover alone really.
It's boggling the amount of artists and writers that have been involved with the magazine.
Yeah, actually that was my other comment. When I look around the room, I started thinking, oh yeah, Sandra's written for Rose, and probably half of the people who are interested in critical writing have also contributed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's lots of. It's amazing to think that the opportunity is so accessible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I think that's the end of my questions. So unless the panel has anything else they'd like to add, I'd like to thank you all so much for being here and taking time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So can we please give our panel a warm. And thank you to Marcus for hosting us. I do want to open it to questions though. So what I'll do is just maybe have Marcus pass the microphone around to anybody interested, or you can just shout it out if you feel like you can project, but thank you.
Go back there.
I don't need a mic.
Yes, you do.
Okay, what do you see from the BlackFlash and from Paved as your relationship as staff to the board? Do you see the board as being kind of redundant, unnecessary, or do you have a good collaborative relationship with the board? Do you take directions from the board? How informed is the board?
I'm going to speak on that with my BlackFlash hat on, as opposed to my Paved hat, because I haven't been there that long to really have sussed out how that works just yet. But with BlackFlash, as you may or may not know, BlackFlash is a staff of one full-time employees. So the BlackFlash board is a working board, one that I was desperately reliant on. the majority of the time that I was there, and they stepped up way beyond their capacity over and over again over the time that I was there. So I was very fortunate. I have a very good relationship with the entire board, and you, if it wasn't for the board for BlackFlash, I don't think that it would have sustained itself. Yeah.
So that's very significant.
Yeah, and I feel like that was a really big deal for. I'm not sure how it was working prior to me being there, but I think
John does.
yeah, John does.
It was the same.
It was the same. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so like I can't thank the board enough. I know that that's not normally how things work, but yeah, for me that's how it worked, and I felt really fortunate.
I don't know if you want to speak on the paved board behalf, but
Well, I guess I would just say that, the board is an opportunity to actually shape an organization, to have input, and it really is completely dependent on the energy that you bring to the project, and certainly there's great potential there. And I think that my own perception is that paved sport has become stronger over the years, and Travis, now stepping into the executive director position, is inheriting a pretty vibrant board of directors.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to say how grateful that I am that BlackFlash has survived. I remember a number of years ago when there was a lot of talk about the lack of a need for print material, right? The demise of the book, the demise of any kind of print publication. So I'm really grateful that BlackFlash didn't think that that was an opportunity to reinvent itself in a digital or electronic way, that there was persistence or tenacity, or maybe like me, a late adopter, you know, and by the time you figure out maybe it's a good idea, it's come back, right? Like cassettes and all of and records and all those things. So I just wanted to say, like, I love paper, and I think that having a paper document is really important to how we experience knowledge and how we access information, how we experience art.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But I'm also like, an elder statesman now. So like I went through this and saw the sort of rise of the digital sort of publication, and all the while I'm still very tactile. I collect records, I collect books, and they're very important to me. I think that if that was all on file somewhere, I don't think I would access it the same way. I wouldn't read it the same way. And so there is a very different relationship with a publication. And it's something that persists in a different way than the digital file. And so I can't even imagine. I know that quite a few publications over the years have made that transition, but I don't believe that they're read the same way, and I don't think that they're revisited the same way either. I think that people have a tendency to like go back through publications, and there's a value there, but I think that with the digital publication, it has this a tendency to just sort of be disposable and forgotten in a way that something like this can't. Yeah.
And artist projects.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely. Yeah.
Going back, were there always artist projects as a part of BlackFlash, or was it something that evolved later?
I don't know what you mean by artist projects.
Oh, sorry.
There was a period when, and I think it was in the 1990s, where they decided that to do an inclusion of artist projects in the in the magazine would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Some of them will pull out.
Yeah.
I think Elizabeth Mackenzie did one of the very first ones for BlackFlash.
I think that, for Sandra, I think what we mean by artist project in this respect is original commissioned work within the magazine proper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking also about the idea of going digital and how BlackFlash, we talked about earlier, has responded to artwork digitizing, and we're still reviewing the changing landscape of photography as a digital medium, but yet remaining as a physical object.
Yeah, maybe there's an irony there too,
Yeah.
right? It's like that we're a new media magazine that there's still a print publication. You know?
Yeah. I think John actually had a question.
I was just going to say that some of the credit for staying in print has to go to Canada Council and SAB. Like without those two funders, there's no way we would have stayed in print probably. So.
Good shout out.
So thank you, Canada Council, SAB. Alison.
I don't need the microphone, though. I've got a big voice. One of the things that came up earlier that I really enjoyed, and David, you said it much more eloquent than I could, and it was talking about, well, and actually Sandra, you did as well, and that's talking about the formation of the cultural identity of the place that we live in, and how we look to our peers and we look at each other. One of the things that I've noticed since moving here in 1999 is how much of a stronger younger generation there is, and just knowing that I have some students here, and I think it's so important that this younger, I guess, examination of where we are be encouraged in this generation. I mean, I'm so excited to see people living and making this their home. But I think, thinking of the magazine and the shifts that take place and the site of BlackFlash being in Saskatoon, I think this community has changed so much. And I guess a potential question might be, how can you see people in this room, this younger generation, affecting what might happen? Nobody wants to answer. It was a twisted question, I realize.
Yeah.
It's a great comment, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, I can speak on that to a certain degree. I was a young man once in Saskatoon. I think I'm not going to directly answer the question, but I will sort of make a comment on. Actually, maybe I will answer the question. I think that a lot of the way that the community in Saskatoon will sustain itself is the mixture of people that stay and then the new blood that comes in. I think that they're both equally important, and I think that their commitment and dedication to the communities that they're interested in is also very valuable. Like they're Paved, for instance, Paved AKA have exhibitions every 6 weeks, and it would be very nice to see some new blood out when those events happen. There is access to production space. There's an access to any number of things within that building that could help feed that community and our community as a whole. And I think it's very important that the Saskatoon arts community support one another, and support one another by by showing up, more than anything. I think that's the big thing. Saskatoon has always had kind of this, I guess I always said that it had kind of a 3-year cycle where things sort of like built up and became like kind of hit peak, and then everybody sort of like slowly kind of dissipated and went away. And when I was younger, I never really made the connection that it probably had something to do with like the university career of a lot of students, where you come into the community, you are doing projects, you're like collaborating, you're like making work, you're putting on gigs, whatever the case, and then you're gone, you know, and Saskatoon feels it because of the size that we are. We're 270,000 now. We were 250,000 in 1995. So that's not a lot of change, you know. But the people that are here need to sort of attend things and support one another. Yeah.
That's very close to what I was thinking, and also get involved with these organizations.
Yeah.
I think that volunteering and taking interest. My first experience stepping onto BlackFlash board, I think I was invited by Allison, who was one of my professors from university, and she just encouraged me to take interest in the magazine. And I'd already been reading it and going to some of the launches that also are an event that occurs for BlackFlash. But I think that especially if you're interested in critical writing, you have to start to surround yourself with these access points and also people who have the same interests. And as you can see, it can spawn into, like, years later, being in the magazine multiple times, looking back and seeing how important it was for your career. And you guys have immediate access. It's here in Saskatoon, which I think is part of what we're celebrating as well, is that we have kept it here for 35 years.
Totally.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I would just say, using, I hope you don't mind, my running with using yourself as an example, but look at how far you can go. Look at the contributions that you've made, and I think that's an maybe exemplar for anybody out there who's interested in entering into BlackFlash. It's completely permeable, and how far you take your involvement is probably will be surprising to you.
You don't have to stay on for 25 years.
Well, I will say that my involvement with the Photographers Gallery when I first came here in 1980 was invaluable because it helped me learn and grow amongst a very supportive group of peers, and was very sustaining.
I think I'm gonna cry. Oh.
Don't.
I mean, to say to you, like, I was 22, you know, when you began the Photographer's Gallery. And it's like you're the community builders. It's the next generation. It is the future. It's just everything.
Well, thanks again, everyone. So we can carry the conversation on as we peruse the BlackFlash table. We have the history of BlackFlash laid out on the table behind you. I think is there 35 years of issues there, or
Well,
a sampling of it?
I think that it starts in volume 3, so
Okay.
33 years.
33 years. And of course, it's the soft launch right now as well for the 35th year anniversary issue, which features the article on Brenda, and it's written by Marcus. And again, Friday night we have the opening at the College Art Galleries for Brenda Francis Pelkey's retrospective at 7:30 p.m. So please come and attend. It's open to everyone. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. 10 minutes. Yeah, just to do a little recap and then 10 minutes. Yeah. In 10 minutes. So that you have time. Just for